Behind every smile, a dangerous secret hides waiting to be found. We are unmasking the raw truth, one gripping narrative at a time, revealing what lies beneath the surface of everyday life. Are you ready? Subscribe now and join us as we solve the mystery.
To check the names to avoid, then write the story. The forbidden names are Claire, Miles, Diana, Patricia, Serena, Garrett, Daphne, Renata, Nora, Beverly, Priya, Keith, Lydia, Owen, Ruth Ann, Ren, Josephine Carr, Harlow, Elliot, Tessa, Vivienne, Marcus, Adeline, Strand, Donovan, Sandra, Cecily, Laurel, Brooke, Harriet, Calloway, Felix, Petra, Augusta. I'll use Isabel, protagonist, Derek, husband, Gwen, sister-in-law instigator, Theo, new partner, Connie, best friend. Let me write the story now. The day I found out, I had stopped at the bakery on Clement Street to pick up his favorite, those dense, over-frosted cinnamon rolls that he'd been eating since college. The ones I'd driven 20 minutes out of my way to get every single Friday for 4 years. I remember standing at the counter while the woman behind the glass wrapped them up, thinking, tonight is going to be a good night. We hadn't had a good night in a while. I thought it was work stress. I thought it was the promotion he didn't get. I thought it was me, honestly, that I'd been too tired, too distracted, too focused on keeping our finances together while he finished his MBA. I'd been thinking a lot of things that turned out to be completely wrong. I came home to our apartment on the 3rd floor of a building on Ashbury, and I could hear voices before I got my key in the door. My husband's voice. And another one I recognized without needing to think about it. Low, deliberate, the kind of voice that always seemed to be performing for a room even when there was no room to perform for. His sister, Gwen. I pushed the door open. They weren't doing anything when I walked in. That's the part that confused me at first. They were just sitting on the couch, close together, his hand over hers, their heads turned toward me with an expression I'd never seen on either of their faces before. Not guilt exactly. Something more composed than guilt, like they had rehearsed for this moment and were now executing it. Isabel, Derek said, we need to talk to you. I put the bakery bag down on the entry table. I remember doing that very deliberately, like if I put it down carefully enough, whatever was about to happen would also be careful. Gwen had been a part of our lives since before Derek and I got married. She was 3 years older than him, unmarried, someone who had always kept herself inserted in her brother's life in ways that felt, occasionally, like she forgot there was a wife in the equation. She had opinions about where we should live, about whether I was right for Derek's long-term goals, about how I handled money, how I dressed, what I cooked. I had never said anything because Derek loved her and I was trying to love the people my husband loved. That felt like the job. We've been together for 8 months, Derek said. I heard the words. I processed them individually. Together. 8 months. I stood there in my own entryway with the cinnamon rolls on the table behind me, and I waited for the sentence to rearrange itself into something that made sense. It didn't. I'm in love with her, he said. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. Gwen didn't say anything. She looked at me the way you look at a traffic accident from the other side of the highway, with attention, but without actual feeling. I asked one question. I don't know why this was the question I asked, but it's the one that came out. Does your mother know? Derek said yes. That was the moment that broke something in me that I didn't know could break separately from everything else. Not the affair. Not the 8 months. Not even his hand still resting on top of hers while he told me. It was that his mother knew. That somewhere in the last 8 months, this had become a family fact, something discussed, maybe even supported. And I had been the only person in my own life who didn't have the information. I left the apartment that night. I took my laptop, my documents, my grandmother's ring that I kept in the drawer of my nightstand, and a duffel bag of clothes. I went to my friend Connie's place in the Richmond district, and I sat on her couch and I didn't cry for almost 2 hours. Connie didn't push me. She made tea and sat across from me and let me be whatever I needed to be. Eventually I said, his sister Connie. His sister Connie. His actual sister. She said, I know. I said, he had cinnamon rolls on the table. She said, I know that too. I cried after that. A lot and for a long time. The divorce took 7 months. Derek's family made it complicated in ways that felt coordinated. His mother suddenly remembered conversations I'd allegedly had that positioned me as financially irresponsible, as emotionally unavailable, as someone who had never really been committed to the marriage. I had emails and bank statements that said otherwise, and eventually the process ended in a settlement that was fair on paper and hollow in every other way. During those 7 months, I kept going to work. I was a project manager at a mid-sized architectural firm in Soma. Not glamorous, but solid, and I was good at it. My clients trusted me. My team trusted me. Work was the one place where nothing about my personal life was visible, unless I chose to make it visible, and I chose not to. I wore the same blazer, I ran the same Monday check-ins, I hit my deadlines. But I was also thinking. I had time to think now, in the evenings, in the apartment I'd moved into alone, a small one-bedroom in the inner sunset that smelled like someone else's cooking, and had a window that looked directly into a concrete wall. I had time to think about what I had been building for the past 4 years. I had funded Derek's MBA, not entirely, but substantially, covered the gap between his loans and the actual tuition, covered our rent while he was in school, picked up the larger share of everything with the quiet assumption that this was temporary, that we were building towards something together, that there would be a together for long enough to make the investment worthwhile. There wasn't going to be a together. But there was still going to be me. I started keeping a notebook that winter. Not a journal. I couldn't write about feelings, I wasn't built for it. But a record of every idea I'd had over the years at work that I hadn't pursued because there hadn't been time or money or bandwidth. There were more of them than I expected. 6 pages by the end of January, 12 by February. One of them kept coming back to me. For 3 years I had been watching the firm I worked for lose mid-scale residential contracts to larger competitors who could offer full-stack project management, design coordination, permitting, contractor management, interior logistics, all under one roof. My firm did good work, but they handed off too early and brought clients back too late. There was a gap in the middle, a real operational gap, where projects fell apart or ballooned in cost. I had covered that gap informally on several contracts because I couldn't stand watching it happen. My clients had noticed. 2 of them had asked me directly if I did independent consulting. I hadn't, but I could. I spent 4 months doing the research while I was still employed. I talked to a contractor named Sheldon who'd been complaining about exactly this coordination problem for 2 years. I had 3 conversations with a real estate attorney named Barbara who walked me through the business structure options. I saved aggressively. And then, 9 months after the night I came home to find my husband telling me he loved his sister, I gave notice and incorporated Strand & Co. Project Solutions. I kept the name. Strand was my mother's maiden name. I liked that it was also a word that meant something. A thread, a filament, one component of something larger and stronger. I liked what it implied about what I was doing, pulling the loose ends together. The first year was lean in ways I hadn't fully prepared for, emotionally, even though I'd prepared for them financially. There's a difference between knowing a year will be hard and living inside that year. I had 2 clients, then 4, then I lost one to a larger firm and spent a week second-guessing everything before Sheldon called me to ask if I wanted to consult on a mixed-use development in Oakland that his crew had just been hired for. I said yes. That project led to another, and then another. By the end of year 2, I had 7 active contracts and 2 people working with me, a junior coordinator named Patrice and a permit specialist I'd poached from the city planning office named Ruben. We were operating out of a co-working space in Hayes Valley that had good coffee and very bad parking, and I genuinely liked going to work every single day. Year 3 was when things shifted into something I hadn't let myself picture. I was approached by a real estate development group that was expanding into the Bay Area from Chicago. Tillman and Reeve Partners, mid-market residential and mixed commercial. They were looking for a local project management firm that could handle their West Coast portfolio coordination end-to-end. The pitch meeting was 2 hours. By the end of it, I knew we were going to get the contract. I knew it the way you sometimes just know things, not from arrogance but from the very specific feeling of being in the right room with the right preparation at exactly the right time. We got it. Strand & Co. went from 7 contracts to managing a pipeline of 42 units across 3 active development sites within 14 months. I hired 6 more people. I moved us into an actual office in Soma, 4 blocks from where I used to work for someone else, with windows that looked out over the skyline instead of a concrete wall. I wasn't thinking about Derek. I want to be clear about that. By year 3 I genuinely wasn't thinking about Derek or Gwen or any of it in the way you think about something that still has the ability to hurt you. They had faded into a category of things that happened rather than things that were still happening. I had built too much new life on top of the old one to feel the shape of it clearly anymore. And then Tillman and Reeve threw their Bay Area launch reception. It was held at a venue in the Design District, one of those converted warehouse spaces with exposed beam ceilings and catering staff in all black, and exactly the kind of crowd where everyone is either making a deal or pretending to have already made one. My business partner Theo, who had joined Strand & Co. 18 months earlier as operations director and had become in that time both indispensable and someone I trusted more than almost anyone, was there with me. We were technically the guests of honor, which still felt strange to say. I was talking to one of the Tillman and Reeve partners when I saw them. I almost missed it. I had turned to accept a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, and when I turned back, there they were, about 30 feet away, coming through the main entrance with the particular kind of entrance that people make when they're not sure they're supposed to be somewhere but are committed to acting like they are. Derek in a suit that was either new or recently dry cleaned. Gwen beside him in a wrap dress, scanning the room the way she always scanned rooms, assessing, calculating, deciding where the most valuable person was standing. They were married now. I knew this not because I had followed their lives, but because Connie had told me 2 years ago, in the tone of someone delivering information they're obligated to share, but wish they didn't have to. Married 6 months after the divorce was finalized. His mother had apparently been at the wedding in what Connie described as her full glory. What I had not known until that moment was that Derek worked for Tillman and Reeve. I found out because the Tillman and Reeve partner I was speaking with, a man named Gordon who had the energy of someone who had been in real estate for 30 years and had stopped finding any of it surprising, turned to follow my eyeline and said, "Oh, Derek, yes. He came on board to head our acquisition analysis team about a year ago. Sharp guy. He'll be reporting through your coordination pipeline on the Oakland sites." I looked at Gordon. I said, "I didn't realize." Gordon said, "Small world." Theo appeared at my elbow with the specific timing that I had come to recognize as his version of situational awareness. He looked at Derek and Gwen. He looked at me. He said nothing, which was the right thing. Derek saw me a few minutes later. I watched him see me, watched the precise sequence of it, the recognition, the recalculation, the adjustment of expression that happened in about 2 seconds and left him looking composed in a way that was clearly costing him something. He walked over. Gwen didn't come with him, which told me she had read the room faster than he had and made a different decision. "Isabel," he said. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I'm the guest of honor," I said. Not unkindly, just as a fact. He looked at the Tillman and Reeve branding on the materials behind me, at the display showing Strand & Co.'s project portfolio, at Theo standing slightly behind my shoulder. I watched him put the picture together. "You built this," he said. "Yes." There was a pause that I didn't try to fill. "Congratulations," he said finally. That's really something, Isabel." I thanked him. I meant it, in the distant way you mean things that don't require you to feel them anymore. Then Gordon appeared to pull me toward another introduction, and I went, and that was the end of the conversation. It lasted maybe 4 minutes. Gwen never approached me that evening. I saw her twice more across the room, once near the bar, once near the exit when they left earlier than most guests. Both times she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before, not the composed performance from the couch on Ashbury Street. Not her usual room-scanning assessment. Something smaller. Something that I would have called recognition if I'd been feeling generous. Theo and I shared a car back to the office afterward to go over the next day's site schedule. "Somewhere on Market Street," he said. "You want to talk about it?" I thought about it for a moment. The city was dark outside the windows and the car smelled like leather and Theo's coffee from earlier in the day. "Not really," I said. He nodded. "Okay. Actually, maybe one thing." He waited. "I drove 40 minutes every Friday for 4 years to buy him cinnamon rolls," I said. Theo was quiet for a second. Then he said, "What kind?" "Cinnamon, with the thick frosting." "From the place on Clement?" "Yes, those are good," he said. "They are," I said. "That's the part that kills me, honestly. They were genuinely good cinnamon rolls." Theo smiled, not at me but at the window, and I laughed for the first time in an hour. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't relief or release or any of the things I'd have expected. It was just something that happened, natural and small, because I was in a car with someone I actually trusted, on the way back to a company I had built from 6 pages of notebook ideas in the worst winter of my life. Derek spent the next 2 years reporting through our coordination pipeline as Gordon had said he would. It was professional. It was occasionally awkward in the way things are awkward when there is history that both parties have agreed to act like there isn't. He was competent. I was fair. The projects got done. His mother called me once, about a year into this arrangement. I don't know how she got my number. She said she was calling to tell me that she hoped there were no hard feelings. That she had always wanted what was best for Derek. That she hoped I understood. I told her I understood completely. I told her that understanding something and accepting it were 2 different things. And that I had arrived at a place where I didn't need her to explain herself to me anymore. Which was a different kind of freedom than forgiveness, but was the one I had actually found, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "You've changed." I said, "You've changed." I said, "Yes, I have." She hung up first. I didn't mind. Connie came to visit the office the following spring, which by then had expanded to include a 2nd floor. She stood in the middle of the main workspace with all its whiteboards and site maps and the quiet industrious noise of people who were good at their jobs doing their jobs, and she looked at me with an expression I recognized. "You really did it," she said. "Did what?" She gestured at everything. All of it. I looked around the room. At Patrice running a pre-construction call on her headset. At Ruben going over permit revisions with a junior analyst. At the whiteboard with the Tillman and Reeve Oakland timeline and the 3 new contracts that had come in from referrals in the last 90 days. At the small framed thing on the wall beside my office door that I'd put up in year 1 and never taken down. A single line I'd written in my notebook that first February. "The loose ends are yours. Pull them together." "It's just work," I said. Connie gave me a look that said she wasn't going to argue but also wasn't going to agree. "You drove 40 minutes every Friday," she said. "For 4 years! For a man who had already decided, I know. And then you drove yourself 40 miles in every other direction for 3 more years, all by yourself." I nodded. "I hope it feels like something," she said. I thought about how to answer that. About the morning I signed the Tillman and Reeve contract and sat alone in my car in the parking structure for 10 minutes before going back inside. About the first time I paid Patrice's salary and felt the specific weight of someone else's livelihood connected to something I'd made. About Derek's face at that reception, the 2-second recalculation, the composed congratulations. About Gwen's expression that I had decided was recognition. "It does," I said. "It feels exactly like something." Connie put her arm around my shoulders, and we stood there for a moment in the middle of everything I had built. And it was quiet enough that I could hear the city outside. And I wasn't thinking about cinnamon rolls or Ashbury Street or the exact weight of a duffel bag packed in the dark. I was just here, present, mine. That turned out to be more than enough. I've thought a lot about what actually happened, not the version where I'm the victim and Derek is the villain, because that version is too simple to be useful. What actually happened is that I trusted the wrong architecture. I built my life around a structure that had someone else's name on the foundation, and I kept adding floors without ever checking whether the ground beneath it was mine. The thing about what Derek and his sister did, it wasn't just betrayal. It was a very specific kind of theft. They took 4 years of my labor, my patience, my willingness to believe that people who said they loved you meant it in the way you meant it, and they spent it on themselves, and then they left me the bill. That's not a supernatural force at work. That's just what happens when a person makes choices from a place of weakness and self-interest for long enough. The consequences aren't punishment. They're just the natural weight of those choices, catching up. I didn't come out the other side of this because I was stronger than the pain. I came out the other side because I decided the pain was information. Every sleepless night in that inner sunset apartment was telling me something about what I actually valued, not what I had assumed I valued, not what I had organized my life around to make someone else comfortable. What I actually valued. Turns out it was the work. It was the notebook. It was the problem on page 6 that I'd been too busy sustaining someone else's life to solve. The intelligence I needed wasn't the kind that passes tests. It was the slower kind. The kind that sits with a hard truth long enough to understand what it's actually saying. It took me months to stop asking why Derek did it and start asking what I was going to do with the rest of my life now that I knew. That shift from the question that has no useful answer to the question that does was the only decision that mattered. And the integrity piece, that one surprised me most. I was fair to Derek when he reported through my pipeline. Not because he deserved it. Because I did. Because the version of myself I was building required me to be someone who operated from the same standard, regardless of whether the other person had earned it. Integrity isn't about being good to people who were good to you. It's about maintaining your own standard when it would be very easy not to. Connie said I changed when she stood in the middle of my office that spring. She was right. But not in the direction anyone who knew me before would have predicted. I didn't become harder. I became more honest. About what I would and wouldn't accept, about what I was actually capable of, about the difference between a life I had fallen into and a life I had chosen. There is no version of this story where I'm grateful for what happened. I'm not. 4 years is not nothing. The cinnamon rolls were genuinely good and the apartment on Ashbury had good light in the mornings, and I had loved Derek in the way you love something before you know what love actually costs. I grieve that, sometimes, in small and private ways. But I don't wish it undone. Because the notebook started in January of the worst year of my life, and everything that matters to me now started in that notebook. That's not a lesson I would have found any other way.